She was kicked off the plane. But she wasn't the one who fell. The moment Olivia Parker handed over her first-class boarding pass, she could feel it. Something was off. The way Amanda Hayes, the senior flight attendant, looked at her. The hesitation, the tight smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Then came the words that changed everything. "I'm sorry, but there's been a seating error. I'll have to ask you to move." A lie, because there was no mistake. No other passengers were asked to move. No system alert had gone off. Just her. Whispers spread through the cabin, but no one spoke up. Not yet. And Olivia? She didn't argue. She didn't demand answers. She simply stood, picked up her bag, and sent a single text. That's when the countdown began. 7 minutes. One decision that couldn't be undone. And a flight attendant who had no idea she'd just destroyed herself. By the time the wheels touched the ground, everything had changed. Because injustice might fly under the radar for a while, but karma always lands on time. Watch until the end to see just how fast karma strikes. And if you love stories of justice served right, hit that like button, drop a comment, and tell me where you're watching from. What happens when you are denied what you rightfully paid for? Would you fight back immediately, or would you wait for the perfect moment? The boarding process of Flight 762 was routine. Passengers scanning their tickets, rolling carry-on luggage down the jet bridge, and finding their seats as the flight crew offered polite smiles. It was an ordinary afternoon at JFK International Airport, with travelers moving in predictable rhythms. Among them was Olivia Parker, walking toward first class with measured confidence. She didn't need to rush. Every step she took exuded the kind of composure that made people turn their heads, effortless yet commanding. She had done this countless times before. Flying first class wasn't a luxury to her. It was an expectation, a part of the life she had built for herself. Dressed in a navy blue pantsuit, with her dark curls pulled back neatly, Olivia was the picture of sophistication. In one hand, she carried a sleek leather bag, and in the other, her boarding pass, C2A, first class. She glanced at the flight attendant greeting passengers at the entrance. Amanda Hayes, according to her name tag. A tall, blonde woman with sharp features and a practiced corporate smile. Olivia nodded politely. As she passed, as she walked down the first-class aisle, she took in her surroundings. Plush leather seats. The faint aroma of freshly brewed coffee. Business executives setting up their laptops. An older woman flipping through a Wall Street journal. Everything was as it should be. She reached seat 2A, placed her bag in the overhead compartment, and sat down. A deep exhale. A moment of peace. Then, the interruption came. "Excuse me, ma'am." Olivia looked up. "Amanda Hayes. I need to check your boarding pass." Olivia blinked, then handed it over without hesitation. Amanda took the ticket, scanning it with unreadable eyes. A brief flicker of something crossed her face. Annoyance? Doubt? It was hard to tell. Amanda's fingers tightened around the boarding pass before she turned abruptly and walked away, heading toward the galley. The shift in energy was immediate. Across the aisle, a businessman in a gray suit lowered his newspaper slightly, watching. The older woman near the window arched an eyebrow. Passengers weren't sure what was happening, but they could feel that something was off. Olivia remained composed, but her fingers tapped lightly on her armrest as she waited. A minute passed, then another. Finally, Amanda returned, her expression carefully neutral. "Miss Parker, there's been a mistake with your booking. We'll need you to move to economy." A silence stretched between them. Olivia studied Amanda's face, searching for any sign of hesitation, of apology. But there was none. "A mistake," Olivia said evenly. Amanda nodded. "Yes, unfortunately, the system must have overbooked first class, and your seat was reassigned." Olivia remained still. She had flown more times than she could count. Overbookings happened, but never like this. "Who was my seat reassigned to?" she asked. Amanda hesitated. "That information isn't available, ma'am. But we have a seat for you in the main cabin." Another pause. Olivia's gaze flicked briefly past Amanda, toward the rows of first-class passengers. Not one of them was being asked to move. Are any other first-class passengers being reassigned? Olivia asked. Amanda's lips pressed together. No, ma'am, but I see. Olivia inhaled slowly, then, without another word, reached for her bag. She didn't argue. She didn't make a scene. She simply stood, her movements deliberate, and walked past Amanda toward economy. But she felt the stares as she walked. Some were confused. Others were uncertain. A few passengers whispered amongst themselves. No one stopped her. No. One asked questions. And that was the real problem, wasn't it? By the time Olivia reached row 22, the differences were jarring. The cramped seats, the lack of space to recline, the overwhelming contrast between here and the luxury she had been forced to leave behind. She placed her bag beneath the seat and settled in, adjusting her posture. She wouldn't allow herself to appear defeated. A soft voice interrupted her thoughts. Would you like some water? Olivia turned to see Rachel Carter, a young flight attendant with kind eyes and a hesitant smile. She wasn't like Amanda. There was no forced politeness, no passive-aggressive authority, just simple professionalism. I'd appreciate that, Olivia replied. Rachel nodded and disappeared toward the galley. Meanwhile, Amanda had resumed her duties in first class, but she couldn't shake an unsettling feeling. Olivia had left too quietly. She had expected frustration, maybe even anger. But Olivia had given her nothing. That's what unnerved her the most. She had seen passengers protest, far less significant inconveniences. But this woman had simply walked away. Amanda exhaled sharply and pushed the thought aside. It didn't matter. The situation was handled. Or so she thought. Back in row 22, Olivia retrieved her phone and typed a message. Situation unfolding as expected. Keep watch. The reply came almost instantly. Understood. Monitoring from our end. She locked her phone and placed it back in her bag. Amanda had made a mistake. A big one. And she had no idea what was coming. What happens when injustice is witnessed but ignored? Does silence make one complicit, or is it the calm before the storm? The low hum of the airplane engines filled the cabin, a constant white noise against the hushed murmurs of passengers settling into their seats. Olivia Parker sat rigidly in her new economy seat, her fingers tapping rhythmically against the armrest. To an outsider, she looked calm, resigned even, but beneath the surface, her mind was a storm of calculations and quiet resolve. Her removal from first class had been swift, almost mechanical. Amanda Hayes had ensured there was no opportunity for protest, no moment of hesitation. Olivia had recognized the tactic immediately. It wasn't about procedure, it was about control. If they moved her quickly, without confrontation, no one would question it. Or at least, that's what Amanda had hoped. The murmurs had begun almost immediately after Olivia took her new seat. Passengers exchanged glances, some confused, others uneasy. A middle-aged woman, 2 rows ahead, whispered to her companion. A man across the aisle frowned as he looked toward first class, as if trying to piece together what he had just witnessed. But no one spoke up. Olivia exhaled slowly, adjusting the cuffs of her blazer. She had spent years mastering patience, understanding that power was not always in loud protests, but in well-placed pressure. She picked up her phone and typed out a message. Situation unfolding as expected. Keep watch. The reply came within seconds. Understood. Monitoring from our end. She locked her phone and slipped it into the side pocket of her bag. Then she waited. Up in first class, Amanda moved through the cabin, offering drinks with a forced smile. She felt the weight of lingering stares, the silent questions she was unwilling to acknowledge. One passenger, a businessman in 3C, lowered his newspaper and caught her attention as she passed. That woman, he said casually, nodding toward economy. She had a first-class ticket, didn't she? Amanda's grip tightened on the tray she was holding. There was a system error, she replied curtly. Her booking wasn't valid. The businessman hummed noncommittally, his gaze lingering just long enough to unsettle her before returning to his paper. Amanda swallowed hard and continued down the aisle. At the back of the plane, in the galley near economy, Rachel Carter, one of the junior flight attendants, was filling a glass of water when she heard a soft voice behind her. I saw what happened. Rachel turned to find Dennis Wells, a senior flight attendant, leaning against the counter. His arms were crossed, his face unreadable. Rachel hesitated, then spoke carefully. "You mean Miss Parker?" Dennis nodded. Amanda didn't check anyone else's ticket, just hers. Rachel exhaled, glancing toward the curtain separating first class from economy. "I don't like this, Dennis." She had a valid seat. She didn't cause any problems. But Amanda treated her like a problem before she even said a word. Dennis sighed, rubbing his temple. "We can't intervene unless she formally complains." Rachel picked up the tray and straightened her shoulders. "Maybe not," she said, "but I can make sure she's treated with the respect she deserves." She walked back into the cabin and gently set the glass of water on Olivia's tray table. Olivia looked at her and gave a small nod of gratitude. "If you need anything else, just let me know," Rachel said, her voice barely above a whisper. Olivia studied her for a moment before responding. "Thank you, Rachel." Rachel hesitated for just a second before turning away. As she walked back to the galley, she could feel Amanda's eyes on her. Amanda knew, and Olivia knew that Amanda knew. The first crack in Amanda's control had just formed. What happens when the truth starts slipping through the cracks? Can those who abuse power hold onto control when the weight of their actions starts to crush them? The tension in the cabin had shifted. It wasn't loud, it wasn't obvious, but it was there, lingering in the hushed conversations, in the subtle glances passengers exchanged. Olivia Parker could feel it, like the distant rumble of thunder before a storm. She remained seated in row 22, her posture composed but her mind sharp, scanning the atmosphere around her. Every injustice had a breaking point, and Amanda Hayes was unknowingly walking toward hers. First class was no longer as comfortable as it had been moments ago. Amanda moved through the aisle, passing out drinks and adjusting trays, but she could feel it, eyes on her, lingering too long. It started with the businessman in seat 3C, the same one who had asked about Olivia earlier. "You never answered my question," he said when she stopped at his row. Amanda forced a polite smile. "Which question, sir?" The man set down his glass of whiskey. "Why was that woman removed from first class?" Amanda's fingers twitched against the serving tray. "As I said, sir, there was a system error." The businessman held her gaze for a second longer than was comfortable before finally nodding, as if filing the information away. Amanda turned quickly, moving toward the galley. That's when she caught sight of Rachel Carter. Rachel wasn't talking, but her body language spoke volumes. She stood near the curtain separating first class from economy, eyes following Amanda, watching everything. Amanda's stomach twisted. She needs to back off. She turned and made her way toward Rachel, her smile practiced but cold. "Is there something I can help you with?" Rachel straightened. "No, ma'am." Amanda leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. "Then I'd appreciate it if you focused on your assigned tasks." Rachel didn't flinch. "I always do." For the first time, Amanda felt something she hadn't expected. Uncertainty. Back in row 22, Olivia received her second message of the flight. "Passengers are noticing. Hold your position." She glanced at the sender, an encrypted line. She had contacts where it mattered, and the wheels were already turning. She turned off her phone screen and leaned back in her seat. She wasn't the one who needed to act now. The passengers would do it for her. An hour into the flight, the first real crack formed. A woman in row 17 shifted in her seat, whispering to her husband. "It's not right," she murmured. "I saw her ticket. It was first class." Her husband, an older man with salt and pepper hair, frowned. "You sure?" The woman nodded firmly. "I was behind her in line when we boarded." She had 2-8 on her pass. Across the aisle, a college-age man in headphones lifted his head slightly, catching fragments of their conversation. He turned to the woman. "Wait, are you talking about the lady they moved?" She hesitated, then nodded. "I thought that was weird," the young man said. "I fly a lot, and I've never seen someone get kicked out of first class unless they were causing trouble." His words lingered in the air. The older man's frown deepened. Amanda, passing through the aisle, felt the shift happening in real time. For the first time, the passengers were connecting the dots. And Olivia? She simply smiled to herself. Dennis Wells watched it unfold from the galley. He wasn't blind. He had been a flight attendant long enough to recognize the subtle undercurrents of a restless cabin. The murmurs, the exchanged looks, it was all leading towards something. Rachel stepped into the galley beside him. "They're starting to talk," she said quietly. Dennis sighed, rubbing his temple. "I figured this would happen." Rachel hesitated. "Are we just going to let it?" Dennis gave her a long look. "Until a formal complaint is made, we don't have a choice." Rachel clenched her jaw. "That's the problem. People wait until it's too late to say something." Dennis didn't argue, because she was right. The moment Amanda truly felt the pressure was when the man in seat 17C spoke up. Amanda was walking back toward first class when she heard it. "Excuse me, miss?" She turned. "Yes." The older man in 17C peered up at her, expression unreadable. "I'd like to know why the woman in row 22 was moved." Amanda's heart skipped a beat. She forced a neutral expression. "Sir, I'm afraid I can't discuss other passengers. I was behind her when we boarded," the man continued. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried weight. "I saw her ticket. It said 2A. So why is she sitting back here?" Amanda's breath came just a bit too fast. "Sir, as I explained to another passenger, earlier there was a system error." A pause. Then the man leaned back in his seat, crossing his arms. "Right," he said. "A system error that just happened to remove her and no one else." Amanda felt the eyes on her again. The businessman in 3C, the college student, the woman who had whispered to her husband. This was no longer a quiet question. It was a thread unraveling, and Amanda had no way to pull it back together. Olivia watched as Amanda turned and walked quickly back to first class. She wasn't foolish enough to believe this would be enough to make things right. But that wasn't the goal, not yet. The goal was momentum. Amanda could no longer pretend this hadn't happened. And soon, neither would the airline. She reached for her phone again and sent a single text. "Phase 2 begins now." Then she leaned back, closed her eyes, and waited. Because this time, she wouldn't need to fight alone. The passengers would do it for her. What happens when those in power realize they've made a mistake? Can damage control stop a storm that has already begun? Or is it too late to contain the fallout? Amanda Hayes had handled thousands of passengers in her career. Some were rude, some were entitled, and some were simply difficult. But Olivia Parker? She was none of those things. And that's what made this worse. Amanda had expected resistance, perhaps an argument, or at least a passive-aggressive complaint. Instead, she got silence. A silence that had now turned into something worse: attention. Passengers were watching. Whispers were growing. And Amanda was beginning to feel like she had lost control of the narrative. She made her way quickly to the galley, needing a moment to collect herself. The stainless steel counters, the neatly stacked trays, everything felt too tight, too constricting. Then, the intercom phone rang. Her stomach twisted. Flight attendants rarely received calls mid-flight unless it was urgent. Amanda hesitated before picking it up, forcing her voice into professional neutrality. "This is Amanda." A pause. Then a calm but firm voice replied. "Amanda Hayes, this is operations. We need to discuss an issue with a passenger." Amanda's fingers tightened around the receiver. "Of course. What's the concern?" she said, keeping her tone measured. The voice on the other end didn't waver. "We received an internal report regarding a first-class passenger being moved to economy. A passenger by the name of Olivia Parker." Amanda's breath hitched, but she recovered quickly. "Yes, we need a clear explanation," the voice interrupted. "The report states that no other passengers were reassigned, and Miss Parker's boarding pass was valid." Amanda swallowed. The air in the galley suddenly felt thinner. "There was an overbooking issue," she said carefully. "I followed protocol, according to our system." The voice cut in again. "There was no overbooking." Amanda felt the ground beneath her shift. Someone had reported her. Rachel Carter sat in the crew's resting area, her hands folded in her lap. She had sent the report 20 minutes ago. It hadn't been an easy decision. Amanda outranked her, and going against a superior always came with consequences. But this wasn't something she could ignore. Dennis Wells sat across from her, arms crossed. He had figured it out the moment she excused herself earlier. "You sent it, didn't you?" he asked quietly. Rachel didn't look away. "Yes." Dennis exhaled, rubbing his temple. "I hope you know what you're doing." Rachel's jaw tightened. "She does." Dennis studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Then let's see how this plays out." Back in the galley, Amanda felt the pressure building. "Operations," she said into the phone, keeping her voice level. "Miss Parker didn't raise any objections when I reassigned her. If she had concerns, she could have spoken up." The pause on the other end was long. Then the voice replied, "That doesn't justify the reassignment. Expect follow-up after landing." The line went dead. Amanda stood frozen, her grip on the phone tightening. This wasn't over. Olivia Parker sat calmly in row 22, legs crossed, posture elegant despite the cramped space. She had seen Amanda return from the galley, her face slightly paler, her steps just a bit stiffer. Something had changed. She allowed herself a small, knowing smile. She wasn't reckless. She knew better than to confront people like Amanda directly. Instead, she preferred something else, letting them trap themselves. Her phone vibrated softly. "Report has been received. Initial response underway. Sit tight." She locked the screen. The wheels were turning, and Amanda was running out of room to maneuver. How long can a lie survive under scrutiny? When whispers turn into questions, and questions turn into demands, what happens to the one who tried to silence the truth? The tension inside Flight 762 was no longer just a whisper. It had taken form, pressing against Amanda Hayes like an invisible weight. She had spent years mastering the art of control, ensuring that passengers obeyed without question. But now she could feel that control slipping through her fingers. She had made one mistake, and Olivia Parker had done nothing to fix it for her. That was the most infuriating part. Olivia had simply moved to economy without a fight, allowing Amanda to think, for a fleeting moment, that she had won. But she hadn't won, because Olivia's silence had done something far more dangerous. It had let others start asking questions. First class wasn't as comfortable as it had been an hour ago. The luxurious leather seats and premium drinks did little to mask the growing unease. Amanda could feel it as she moved through the aisle, passengers watching her just a little too closely, conversations quieting whenever she passed. The businessman in 3C, who had first questioned her, wasn't finished. "Excuse me," he called out as Amanda walked by. She turned, keeping her expression neutral. "Yes, sir?" The man leaned back in his seat, swirling the ice in his whiskey glass. "I asked you earlier about the woman in economy, the one who had 2A on her boarding pass." Amanda's fingers curled around the drink tray she was holding. "As I explained before, sir, there was a system error. It was out of our control." The businessman studied her. "Right, a system error." His tone was unreadable, but Amanda didn't like the way he was looking at her. She forced a smile and continued down the aisle. But the moment she turned away, she heard the man mutter to his seatmate, "Doesn't add up." In the crew's resting area, Rachel Carter sat across from Dennis Wells, arms crossed. "She's losing control," Rachel said. Dennis sighed. "I figured this would happen." Rachel's jaw tightened. "And yet, we're all just standing here, watching it happen." Dennis gave her a measured look. "We're flight attendants, Rachel. We follow protocol." Rachel's hands balled into fists. "And what happens when protocol is used to justify something that isn't right?" Dennis exhaled. He respected Rachel, admired her even, but he also knew how dangerous it was to go against the chain of command mid-flight. Before he could respond, the crew's intercom phone rang. Rachel and Dennis exchanged glances. Amanda was about to get another call. Amanda had just entered the galley when the intercom buzzed again. Her stomach sank. She had hoped the first call would be the end of it. that operations would let it go until landing. But hope was a fragile thing. She picked up the receiver. "This is Amanda." The same voice from before, calm, firm, and utterly unimpressed. "Amanda Hayes, this is operations again. We have received another report about the situation with Miss Parker." Amanda's breath hitched. "Another report?" "Correct. We are formally requesting a detailed explanation for why Miss Parker was reassigned when there was no system error." Amanda's throat felt dry. "Sir, I followed. The report we received," the voice interrupted, "was submitted internally by a crew member." Amanda went still. Her own crew had turned against her. While Amanda was on the phone, back in row 22, Olivia Parker was watching everything unfold. She didn't need to listen in to know what was happening. She could see it in the way Amanda's body stiffened in the galley, the way Rachel stood with her arms crossed in the crew's resting area, the way passengers kept whispering her name. She didn't need to speak. She had already won. A soft voice pulled her from her thoughts. "Excuse me." Olivia turned. It was the middle-aged woman from row 17, the one who had been whispering to her husband earlier. "I just wanted to say," the woman hesitated, then continued, "what happened to you wasn't right." Olivia gave a small, polite smile. "I appreciate that." The woman glanced toward first class. "A few of us, we noticed." Olivia simply nodded. That was enough. One voice could be ignored, but when many started speaking at once, that was when things changed. Amanda slammed the phone down harder than she intended. She had one job: keep the flight smooth, keep passengers in their place. Now, she was being questioned by her own airline, her own crew, and worst of all, the passengers. This was slipping away from her. And if there was one thing Amanda Hayes hated, it was losing control. She took a deep breath, straightened her uniform, and marched toward economy. Olivia heard Amanda's footsteps before she saw her. When Amanda stopped beside her row, Olivia didn't move. "Miss Parker," Amanda began, her voice clipped. "Do you need anything?" Olivia looked up, unbothered. "No, thank you." Amanda hesitated. "If you have any concerns, I'd be happy to." "I don't." Olivia cut in smoothly. Then, she tilted her head slightly, studying Amanda. "Unless," Olivia continued, voice calm, "you do." Amanda's stomach twisted. The way Olivia said it, like she already knew the answer. Amanda had lost, and Olivia had never needed to fight. When walls start closing in, will Amanda be able to escape the consequences? Or has her fate already been sealed? Amanda Hayes had always believed she was good at controlling situations. She could handle difficult passengers, navigate airline bureaucracy, and smooth over problems before they escalated. But now, she wasn't in control anymore. The call from operations had shaken her. The whispers among the passengers had unsettled her. And the knowledge that one of her own crew members had reported her, that sent her stomach into freefall. She needed to act fast before things spiraled further. In the cockpit, Captain Eric Monroe sat with his hands folded as he listened to the latest update from operations. His co-pilot glanced at him, waiting for a response. "So what's the call?" the co-pilot asked. The captain exhaled slowly. "Operations wants us to ensure that Miss Parker is treated with complete professionalism for the rest of the flight." The co-pilot raised an eyebrow. "That's oddly specific." Monroe nodded. "And they want a full report from the cabin crew upon landing." The co-pilot whistled softly. Someone really messed up. Monroe didn't respond immediately. Instead, he reached for the intercom. "Amanda Hayes," he said, his voice steady. "Report to the cockpit immediately." Amanda had barely had time to compose herself when the intercom crackled. The captain was calling her. Her heart pounded as she made her way to the cockpit, her mind racing through excuses, justifications, anything that could get her out of this. She knocked on the cockpit door. "Come in." Monroe's voice came through the speaker. She stepped inside, feeling the weight of both pilots' eyes on her. "Close the door," Monroe instructed. Amanda complied. The silence stretched for a long, unbearable moment. Then Monroe spoke. "We received a call from operations," he said, his tone unreadable. "They want an explanation about what happened with Miss Parker." Amanda swallowed. Sir, there was a system error. There was no system error, Monroe interrupted, his gaze sharp. And I don't like being lied to. Amanda's throat went dry. Monroe leaned forward. Now, I'm giving you a chance to tell me the truth. What happened? Amanda's mind raced. She couldn't admit the real reason. She couldn't say that she had removed Olivia Parker because she thought she didn't belong in first class. I was following standard procedures, Amanda stammered. Monroe didn't blink. If you were following procedures, then why is operations demanding a full report? Amanda had no answer. Monroe's voice lowered. This is serious, Amanda. You need to start thinking about what happens next. The meaning behind his words was clear. If she didn't fix this, she wouldn't just be dealing with the airline. She'd be dealing with the consequences of her own actions. Back in first class, Dennis Wells was watching everything unfold. Rachel Carter had just filled him in on her report to operations. Dennis had been hesitant to get involved before. But now it was clear that Amanda was on her way out. And when a ship starts sinking, the smart ones jump first. Rachel glanced toward Amanda's empty station. She's in the cockpit, she murmured. Dennis nodded. She's running out of options. Rachel's eyes darkened. Good. They both turned when they heard a voice nearby. I want to file a formal complaint. They turned. It was the businessman in 3C. Dennis hesitated. About what, sir? The businessman set his drink down. About what happened to Miss Parker. Rachel's pulse quickened. It was happening. And Amanda had no idea. In row 22, Olivia checked the time. 1 hour until landing. She had remained silent for most of the flight, letting the situation unravel on its own. Now, she could see the consequences taking shape. Passengers were talking. The crew was turning. And Amanda was losing everything she had worked for. A soft ding broke her thoughts. A text. She's in the cockpit. They're cornering her. Everything's emotion. Olivia let out a slow breath. She had been waiting for this moment. And now it was finally here. How much pressure can one person withstand before they break? When the weight of truth crashes down, will Amanda fight back or finally face reality? Amanda Hayes had spent years perfecting her ability to control people. She knew how to command a cabin, how to de-escalate situations, how to make passengers comply without even realizing they had been manipulated. But none of that was working now, because she was the one being controlled, and the walls were closing in fast. Amanda stood stiffly in the cockpit, hands clasped in front of her, heart pounding against her ribs. Captain Eric Monroe was staring at her like a father waiting for his child to confess a lie he already knew was true. His co-pilot, David Langley, leaned back in his seat, arms crossed. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. The silence was unbearable. Finally, Monroe sighed. Amanda, let's try this again. Amanda swallowed hard. You removed Miss Parker from first class, Monroe continued, voice dangerously even. You claimed there was a system error, but operations confirmed there was no overbooking, no reassignment, nothing. Amanda's pulse quickened. Sir, Monroe held up a hand. Enough. You have one chance to tell me what really happened before we land. Because if you lie to me again, I promise you, this will not end well for you. Amanda clenched her jaw. She couldn't tell the truth. She couldn't say that she had taken one look at Olivia Parker and decided she didn't belong in first class. That it had been nothing but a split-second judgment, a flicker of bias disguised as authority. If she admitted that, her career was over. So instead, she doubled down. There was a mistake in the system, she repeated, voice steadier this time. I was following standard procedure. Monroe's expression darkened. I see. Amanda exhaled, relieved. Maybe she had convinced him. Then let's see what the passengers have to say. Amanda's stomach dropped. What? Monroe reached for the intercom. This is your captain speaking. Ladies and gentlemen, I understand there have been some concerns regarding a seating reassignment earlier in the flight. If any passengers witnessed this and would like to provide their account, please inform a crew member. Amanda's blood turned to ice. He had just invited the entire plane to testify against her, and she already knew what they would say. In row 22, Olivia Parker's lips curled slightly as she heard the announcement. She had been waiting for this. Around her, murmurs erupted as passengers exchanged glances. Then a voice rang out. "I'd like to speak." It was the businessman in 3C. He stood, adjusting his blazer, then turned toward Rachel Carter. "I saw everything. That woman," he gestured toward Olivia, "was seated in first class. She had a valid ticket, and yet she was removed while no one else was." Rachel nodded, noting his statement. Another voice chimed in. "I saw too." It was the woman from row 17, the one who had whispered to Olivia earlier. She turned toward Dennis. "I was right behind her in line when we boarded. Her pass definitely said 2A." Dennis took a breath. Noted. Then a third voice. "I recorded it." Silence. All heads turned toward a young man in row 19. He held up his phone. "I started filming when she was told to move. I thought it was weird." Amanda's entire body tensed. Rachel took the phone, quickly reviewing the footage. It was damning. The video clearly showed Amanda standing over Olivia. Voice clipped, demeanor calculated. It captured every hesitation, every glance Amanda had thrown toward first class as if expecting someone to back her up. It showed Amanda's guilt. Rachel didn't hesitate. She turned, the phone still in hand. "Captain Monroe," she said through the intercom. "You'll want to see this." Amanda's breath came short and fast. This was it. She had lost, and there was nothing she could do about it. The cabin was no longer on her side. Passengers were openly talking now, not even trying to whisper. The first class was furious. The economy was vindicated. And the crew? The crew had turned against her completely. She had always believed that authority meant control, that her title, her uniform, her position in the chain of command would shield her. But she had forgotten the most important rule of flying. The plane belongs to the passengers. And now they were demanding justice. A chime sounded overhead. The cockpit was calling her back. Amanda hesitated. Then, slowly, she stood and walked back toward her own judgment. Olivia didn't follow Amanda's retreating form. She didn't need to. She had already won. Instead, she reached for her phone, unlocking the screen with a simple tap. A single unread message awaited her. "Landing procedures initiated. Everything is set." She exhaled. Slowly. Good. Then, with calm, measured fingers, she typed out her response. "Proceed as planned." She locked the phone, settled back into her seat, and watched the world finally catch up to the truth. The truth is out, but is justice guaranteed? When the wheels touch the ground, who will be held accountable? And who will walk away untouched? Amanda Hayes had never dreaded a landing before. But as Flight 762 began its descent, every second felt like a countdown to her inevitable reckoning. The passengers had turned against her. The crew had betrayed her. Operations were watching her every move. And the worst part? She had no one to blame but herself. The fasten seatbelt sign blinked on, and a hush fell over the cabin as the final announcements played. Outside, the city lights of New York flickered into view beneath the clouds. Amanda sat stiffly in the jump seat, eyes locked on the cockpit door. Captain Monroe hadn't spoken to her since their last conversation, but she knew what was waiting for her the moment they touched down. And she wasn't the only one who knew. Across the cabin, Olivia Parker sat composed as ever, gazing out the window. She had played her role perfectly, never raising her voice, never making a scene. And yet, Amanda knew she had been outmaneuvered from the very start. The plane jolted slightly as the wheels met the tarmac. A slow, steady taxi began. Then, the final chime. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to John F. Kennedy International Airport." The voice of the first officer droned on, but Amanda barely heard it, because she could see them now. Security, standing just outside the jet bridge, waiting for her. The cabin doors opened. Passengers unbuckled, stretched, retrieving luggage. The usual chaos of arrival. But Amanda couldn't move. Her hands were frozen on her lap as she watched the first passengers file out, their gazes lingering on her with thinly veiled satisfaction. Rachel and Dennis stood near the exit, speaking in low voices with a man in a dark suit, an airline executive. And Olivia? She wasn't in a hurry. She waited until the aisle was nearly clear before standing, moving with purpose but without urgency. When she reached the front, she didn't even spare Amanda a glance. Instead, she turned to Rachel. "Thank you," Olivia said softly. Rachel nodded, understanding everything behind those two words. Then, Olivia stepped off the plane. Amanda inhaled sharply, because she knew it was her turn now. Amanda Hayes? She looked up. Two uniformed security officers stood before her, flanking the airline executive. The executive, a tall man with neatly combed hair and a no-nonsense expression, held up a folder. "We need to have a conversation." Amanda swallowed hard. "Aye, this way." It wasn't a request. Her legs felt numb as she stood, forcing herself to keep her chin up as she stepped onto the jet bridge. And that's when she saw them. Cameras. Passengers had their phones raised, recording, snapping pictures, whispering among themselves. The video of Olivia being forced out of first class had already spread online. Now, this would be the follow-up. Amanda clenched her jaw and kept walking. While Amanda was led away, Olivia was greeted by a different set of faces. A woman in a navy blue suit extended a hand. "Miss Parker, I'm Evelyn Carter, VP of Passenger Relations." Olivia shook her hand, her grip firm. "I assume you've been briefed." Evelyn nodded. "We'd like to discuss this privately. Please come with me." Olivia followed her through a set of glass doors into a quiet executive lounge. A conference table, bottled water, a controlled corporate environment, damage control. The door closed behind them. Evelyn exhaled, taking a seat. "First, let me say that what happened on this flight was unacceptable. We take matters of discrimination very seriously." Olivia didn't react. "Do you?" Evelyn hesitated. "Yes. And we are fully prepared to address this incident appropriately." Olivia tilted her head. "And what does that mean?" The VP straightened. "Amanda Hayes has been suspended pending investigation." Olivia arched an eyebrow. "Suspended." Evelyn shifted slightly. "We have policies in place. Due process must be followed." Olivia leaned forward, cutting through the corporate script. "This isn't just about Amanda Hayes." Evelyn faltered. "Excuse me. This is about the culture that allowed her to feel empowered to make that decision." Olivia's voice was steady, but firm. "Firing her won't fix the problem. Changing your policies will." Evelyn studied her. "What are you asking for?" Olivia pulled out her phone, tapping the screen once. A document appeared. A list of demands. "Systemic reform," she said simply, sliding the phone forward. Evelyn picked it up, scanning the contents. Her expression tightened. Because Olivia wasn't asking for an apology. She was demanding real change. Meanwhile, in a separate office, Amanda sat across from a panel of airline officials. It felt like an interrogation. One of the officials, a woman with sharp eyes, folded her hands. "Miss Hayes, do you understand why you're here?" Amanda forced herself to meet her gaze. "I do." The woman nodded. "We have received multiple complaints, statements from passengers, and video evidence regarding your handling of Miss Parker's seating." Amanda's stomach churned. Another executive leaned forward. "Would you like to explain your decision?" Amanda hesitated. She could lie. She could deny everything. She could fight this. But deep down she knew it wouldn't matter. So, for the first time, Amanda Hayes said nothing. The silence stretched. Finally, the first executive sighed, closing the folder in front of her. "Amanda Hayes, effective immediately. You are placed on administrative leave pending termination." Amanda felt the words like a slap. No more arguments. No more excuses. It was over. As Amanda left the office, the reality of her downfall became clear. The video of her forcing Olivia out of first class was everywhere. Headlines, news outlets, social media outrage. And at the center of it all, Olivia Parker's quiet, unwavering presence. But Olivia wasn't looking for revenge. She was looking forward. And as she walked out of the airport, phone buzzing with news updates, she knew this was only the beginning. What happens when a company built on silence is forced to listen? Can one act of injustice spark a movement, or will it be swept under the rug like so many before it? Amanda Hayes was officially finished. The news broke within hours of landing. Her name was plastered across every major headline. The video of her removing Olivia Parker from first class had gone viral, sparking outrage, think pieces, and endless debate. But Amanda wasn't just another disgraced flight attendant. She was a symptom of something bigger. And for the first time, the airline couldn't ignore it. By morning, #JusticeForOlivia was trending worldwide. The footage had been dissected, analyzed, and shared millions of times. News anchors debated it, experts weighed in, and passengers from other flights started coming forward with similar stories. This isn't just about one woman, a CNN analyst said. It's about a system that allows discrimination to go unchecked. The airline scrambled to respond. Press releases were issued. Statements were made. But none of it was enough. Because the public wanted action, Amanda sat in her apartment, blinds drawn, phone buzzing nonstop. Friends, family, reporters, everyone wanted a comment. But what could she say? That she hadn't meant for this to happen? That she had just been following her instincts? That she never thought she'd get caught? She turned on the TV, only to see her own face staring back at her. In a shocking turn of events, Amanda Hayes, a senior flight attendant with over 10 years of experience, has been officially terminated from her position. The airline released a statement earlier today. Amanda squeezed her eyes shut. It was over. And yet it wasn't. Because now, the world wasn't just talking about her. They were talking about the entire industry. Inside corporate headquarters, Evelyn Carter, VP of Passenger Relations, was watching the chaos unfold. "This is the nightmare," one executive muttered. Evelyn didn't disagree. The board had convened an emergency meeting, scrambling to contain the crisis. "We need to issue another statement," one member insisted. "A stronger one." Evelyn exhaled sharply. "Statements aren't going to fix this." The room fell silent. She continued, voice steady. "We fired Hayes. That's a start. But the public knows this isn't just about her." A murmur spread through the table. "They want accountability," Evelyn pressed. "And if we don't give it to them, they'll take it from us." She let that sink in. Then she placed a folder on the table. A folder labeled, "Proposed Policy Reform." "This is what we do next," she said. The board members stared at it. And for the first time, they realized this wasn't just a PR crisis. This was a reckoning. Meanwhile, back at JFK Airport, Rachel Carter was called into the manager's office. She braced herself, half expecting backlash for filing the report. Instead, she was greeted with something she never saw coming: a promotion. "We need people like you in leadership," the manager said. "People who speak up." Rachel blinked. "Are you serious?" "Dead serious." Rachel accepted on the spot. And she wasn't the only one stepping up. Dennis Wells, who had spent years keeping his head down, finally spoke up. In a bold move, he gave an exclusive interview to the press. "This isn't just about Olivia Parker," he said on live television. "It's about every passenger who's ever been treated unfairly, every crew member who's been afraid to challenge bad decisions. We need real change." His words spread like wildfire. And suddenly, the airline wasn't just facing public pressure. They were facing internal rebellion. While the world raged around her, Olivia Parker remained noticeably silent. She ignored interview requests. She stayed off social media. Because she wasn't interested in attention. She was interested in results. So while the public demanded justice, Olivia was sitting in a high-rise office across from Evelyn Carter. "People want a statement from you," Evelyn said carefully. Olivia leaned back. "I have nothing to say." Evelyn hesitated. "That's surprising." Olivia met her gaze. "I don't want apologies. I don't want PR stunts." She tapped the policy reform folder between them. "I want this." Evelyn swallowed. "It won't be easy." Olivia smiled for the first time. "Nothing worth doing ever is." And with that, she sealed the fate of an entire industry. What does justice truly look like? Is it punishment or is it change? And when the dust settles, who will stand tall? And who will be forgotten? The storm had passed, but the world had changed. For the first time, an airline was being forced to answer for more than just a PR scandal. The public outrage hadn't faded. The demand for action hadn't quieted. And at the center of it all, Olivia Parker sat calmly, watching as everything fell into place. Because justice wasn't about revenge. It was about making sure this never happened again. 1 week after the flight, the airline held a press conference. Evelyn Carter stood before a packed room of reporters, cameras flashing, microphones pointed toward her. She took a breath, and then she changed history. As of today, we are implementing a complete overhaul of our training and passenger policies, she announced. This includes mandatory bias training for all employees, increased oversight on seating reassignments, and a new passenger rights initiative. A murmur spread through the crowd. But Evelyn wasn't done. We have also established an independent review board to handle discrimination complaints, ensuring that no passenger will ever feel unheard again. The headlines wrote themselves. Airline enforces historic policy changes after discrimination scandal. Olivia Parker's name was in every article, but she didn't attend the press conference because her work was already done. Across the city, in a tiny apartment, Amanda Hayes watched the press conference alone. She had no job, no career, just a reputation she could never escape. Her phone still rang with interview requests, but no one wanted to hear her side of the story. They wanted a villain, and Amanda Hayes had become one. For the first time, she asked herself, had she really thought she could get away with it? She turned off the TV, because watching the world move on without her, that was worse than any punishment she could have imagined. Back at JFK Airport, Rachel Carter walked through the terminal as a supervisor for the first time. The promotion still felt surreal, but as she passed her old team, she noticed something. They stood taller. They spoke louder. They weren't afraid to do the right thing anymore, and that meant more than any title ever could. Meanwhile, Dennis Wells took his seat in a live news interview. I should have spoken up sooner, he admitted. But I won't make that mistake again. And he wouldn't, because people were finally listening. As the airlines celebrated their damage control, Olivia Parker sat in a quiet office, staring at an unsigned contract. It was an offer, a consulting position, helping the airline enforce their new policies. It was a rare opportunity to shape an industry from the inside. But Olivia knew something they didn't. They only made this offer because they got caught. She reached for a pen, and then, with a small smile, she slid the contract back across the table. Thank you, she said, standing. But I'll be watching from the outside. Evelyn Carter's expression tightened. Are you sure? Olivia nodded. Call me if you ever forget why you made these changes, she said. And with that, she walked away, on her own terms. Because real justice wasn't about power. It was about holding power accountable. And Olivia Parker? She had done exactly that. The end. How do you feel about the way this story ended? Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss another powerful story.